There's a phone call that was made on Sunday night, not to Washington, not to Tel Aviv, not to Tehran, that tells you more about where this war is actually heading than any missile trajectory, any CENTCOM press conference, or any Trump Truth social post. The call was made by a Gulf head of state to a European counterpart. And the message, according to officials briefed on the conversation, was not about military coordination or intelligence sharing or interceptor resupply. The message was, get Trump to stop. You have leverage over him that we no longer have. Our cities are burning. Our missiles are running out. Our tourists are gone. Our airports are closed. Our energy sectors are shut. And every hour this continues, we lose another decade of economic development that we cannot replace. Gulf states vowed in a joint statement to stand united in defense of our citizens, sovereignty and territory, and reaffirm our right to self-defense in the face of these attacks. But simultaneously, multiple Gulf governments have privately been urging European and Russian intermediaries to pressure Washington to halt the operation. Stand united in public. Privately beg Europe and Russia to stop Trump. That gap between the official joint statement of defiance and the private diplomatic frantic lobbying is the most honest description of the Gulf's strategic position on the morning of Day 4 of Operation Epic Fury. These governments cannot publicly break with America, because American bases are the only thing standing between their territories and whatever comes next from Tehran. But they cannot continue absorbing Iranian missile strikes indefinitely, because their own Patriot batteries are running out of interceptors, their own populations are panicking, and their own economies, built on decades of projecting calm and safety and stability, are being destroyed in real time. Years of Iranian detente building with the Gulf may be over, said Aisha Chowdhury, principal at the Asia Group. Years of detente building over. That assessment, published by CNBC on Monday morning, describes the strategic consequence that the Gulf's private lobbying campaign is trying to prevent from becoming permanent. For the past 5 years, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Bahrain spent billions of dollars in enormous diplomatic capital building, working relationships with Tehran, trade links, diplomatic channels, back-channel communications, that gave them a buffer against exactly the confrontation that is now consuming their cities. All of it is now destroyed. Not because Iran attacked first, because America launched from their soil and Iran treated them as co-belligerents. And now, with those detente relationships burned, with their interceptor stocks depleting, with their economies shutting down, the Gulf states are making the only phone call left available to them, to the Europeans and the Russians, asking someone, anyone, to stop Trump before the next wave arrives. Russia's foreign ministry said it was particularly reprehensible that these strikes are once again being conducted under the cover of the renewed negotiation process. Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev accused the U.S. of having used its nuclear talks with Iran as a cover for military operations, used diplomatic negotiations as cover for military operations. That is Russia's official characterization, not a fringe accusation, but the Kremlin's formal diplomatic position of what America did. And when Gulf states are privately asking Russia to intervene diplomatically to stop Trump, they are implicitly acknowledging that Russia's characterization is closer to their private view than America's victory narrative. The country whose territory is burning, whose gas production has ceased, whose airports are closed, does not have the luxury of public position management. It has only the private phone call, and the private phone calls are all going to Moscow and Brussels and Paris, not to Washington. The source document today asks the question that the Gulf's private lobbying campaign is built around, and it is a question so simple, so structurally clear, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If America's military bases had not been in the Gulf, could America have launched this operation? According to U.S. officials, dozens of U.S. strikes were carried out by planes based around the Middle East and from one or more aircraft carriers based around the Middle East, not from carriers alone, not from American soil, from bases in Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, bases that host tens of thousands of American personnel, that store American weapon systems, that provide the refueling and logistics infrastructure without which a 1,000-target, 48-hour air campaign against a country 1,500 kilometers away is operationally impossible. The Israeli F-35s that killed Khamenei needed American tanker aircraft to refuel over Iraq. Those tankers flew from Gulf bases. Without those bases, the Israeli jets fly a one-way mission, or they do not fly at all. Without those bases, the American strike package reaches half its planned targets or reaches none. Without those bases, Operation Epic Fury does not exist in the form it took on Saturday morning. Iran understands this, which is why Iran is not targeting only American military assets. It is targeting the economic infrastructure of every country whose soil America used, making the cost of hosting American military bases so catastrophically visible, so personally felt by every hotel owner and airline passenger and refinery worker and LNG trader in the Gulf, that the next American president who asks for basing rights hears a different answer. Iran's missiles targeted Israel and multiple Gulf states. the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Jordan. All countries with air bases containing U.S. assets. All countries with U.S. air bases. Every country on that list. Not random targeting, not opportunistic strikes. A systematic campaign against every territory from which American power projection in the Gulf operates. And the economic logic is devastating in its precision. You do not need to defeat America militarily to change American strategic behavior. You need to make the cost of American basing so high, so immediate, so visible to the populations and governments of host countries, that those governments begin calculating whether the protection America offers is worth the destruction America brings. The asymmetric cost structure that the source document identifies is now visible in every market on Earth. Iran fires a drone that costs tens of thousands of dollars. Kuwait fires a Patriot interceptor that costs $2 to $3 million. Repeat that calculation across 1,000 Iranian drones and missiles over 4 days. Add the cost of 3 destroyed American F-15Es. Add the cost of the Ras Tanura shutdown. Add the cost of Qatar Energy's ceased LNG production. Add the cost of 1,400 canceled flights and closed airports and evacuated hotels and plummeting property values. The asymmetric exchange ratio, Iran spending $1 to force its adversaries to spend 40 or 50, is not a tactical observation. It is the strategic architecture of a war Iran designed to be financially unsustainable for the American alliance system, even if it is militarily winnable. Energy markets are braced for possible interruptions to energy supplies from the Middle East, with marine hull insurance war risk premiums in the Gulf estimated to range from 25 to 50% higher. And a direct attack on merchant shipping could have major repercussions across war insurance rates. 25 to 50% higher insurance premiums, applied to every cargo moving through every Gulf port, applied to every tanker attempting transit through a strait that is conditionally open at Iran's discretion, applied to every LNG cargo that would have shipped from Ras Laffan if Ras Laffan were not shut. The insurance market, the mechanism by which the financial system prices risk into the physical movement of goods, has just repriced the Gulf's entire commercial value proposition in a single weekend. Not for the duration of the war, for the duration of the insurance market's uncertainty about whether the war will end and whether the infrastructure will be rebuilt. That uncertainty is priced as a premium on every good that transits the Gulf until further notice. There's a strategic reversal happening in real time on Monday morning that no American strategic planner modeled in any scenario document, any war game, or any intelligence assessment produced in the 18 months before Operation Epic Fury, a reversal so clean and so complete that it reads like the outcome of a plan rather than the accident of improvisation. Europe is going to Russia for gas, not in the abstract, not as a theoretical scenario. In the specific, operational, emergency purchase sense, European energy ministers are opening back-channel conversations with Gazprom this morning because Qatar Energy's ceased LNG production, combined with the Strait of Hormuz's conditional closure, has left European storage at below 30% capacity with no alternative supplier capable of filling the gap at scale. The only country with pipeline infrastructure connecting directly to European markets at sufficient volume to replace Qatari LNG is Russia, and Russia is selling. Russia was unequivocal in its condemnation of the U.S. and Israeli strikes, calling them a reckless step and a deliberate, premeditated, and unprovoked act of armed aggression, accusing America of pushing the region toward a humanitarian, economic, and potentially even radiological disaster. Humanitarian, economic, and potentially even radiological disaster. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov published those words on Saturday. By Monday morning, the economic disaster is confirmed. European gas up 50%, Ras Laffan shut, Ras Tanura halted, Maersk suspended. The radiological dimension remains a warning, and the humanitarian dimension is visible in 555 Iranian dead, 11 Israeli dead, 1 seafarer dead, 2 tanker crews evacuated, and 108 girls who did not come home from school in Manab. Every European government that spent 3 years building LNG supply relationships with Qatar, specifically to avoid dependence on Russian gas, now faces the same choice it faced in February 2022. Buy Russian gas or tell your population to freeze. In 2022, Europe chose principle over comfort and accepted the economic pain. In 2026, with gas prices already 50% higher in a single morning, and Qatar Energy's shutdown having no announced timeline for resolution, the political calculus is different. Because this time, the crisis was not caused by Russia. It was caused by an American military operation that Europe's own prime ministers publicly separated themselves from. Britain saying it does not believe in regime change from the skies, France calling for maximum restraint, Germany debating whether to join or condemn. The attack on Iran presents Europe with a new test in already strained ties with the U.S., as appeals for restraint clash with Trump's assertion that force will succeed. Already strained ties, a new test. The Washington Post is describing the America-Europe relationship on day 4 of a war that Trump launched without consulting his allies, from bases his allies did not know he planned to use, to achieve a regime change objective that Britain's Prime Minister publicly disavowed in Parliament. The alliance that defeated the Soviet Union, that rebuilt Europe after World War II, that created the institutional architecture of the post-war international order, that alliance is being tested by a war in the Middle East that has shut down European gas supplies, destroyed the Gulf's safe haven economic brand, and produced a friendly fire incident in Kuwait that America cannot explain without admitting either catastrophic operational failure or something far more concerning. Analysts are watching for potential signs of whether this latest Middle East conflict could risk derailing U.S.-China diplomatic engagement and even President Trump's planned visit to Beijing later this month. Trump's planned visit to Beijing in the same month. The president who launched a war that China called a grave violation of sovereignty, that China's foreign minister called for an immediate ceasefire to end, that China's UN ambassador called shocking. That president is planning to fly to Beijing to discuss trade in Taiwan. The diplomatic geometry of that visit, scheduled for later this month, now includes a war that China has officially condemned, a Strait of Hormuz closure that threatens half of China's crude oil supply, and a Qatar energy shutdown that affects Chinese LNG contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. China will not be a passive host. This is what the Gulf's private lobbying campaign is trying to stop before it metastasizes. Not the war itself. They cannot stop the war. But the sequence. War creates energy crisis sends Europe to Russia. Europe-Russia gas deal weakens American leverage over European policy. Weakened American leverage means weakened support for the operation. Weakened support for the operation means America's coalition frays before it achieves any of the objectives that justified the original decision to launch. Iran spent $1. The alliance is spending $40, and the phones are ringing in Moscow and Brussels and Paris, not because the Gulf states want Russia or Europe to win, but because they want America to stop before the bill arrives that no alliance can afford to pay. Share this video to every contact you have right now. Gulf states are privately begging Europe and Russia to stop Trump. Europe is opening back channels to Russia for gas because Roslafen is shut. America's coalition is fraying. Iran spent $1 for every 40 America's allies are spending to defend themselves. And Trump's visit to Beijing is scheduled for later this month. The same Beijing that called his war shocking and has condemned it at every multilateral forum available.